Hi, welcome back to Feel the Glory Cavalry. In this video we're going to talk about cavalry tactics. So let's start with a quick one here, which is light horse. We're charging the flank of medium infantry. So if they attempt to do this, we'll get the message saying flank charge, cohesion won't drop, as contact is light troops versus non-light troops. Then the factors will be poor, so although a win on the impact phase is likely, the following melee chance is given a 0 chance of success. Let's see what happens. So, but in this particular game, the cavalry was under pressure, so decided to charge in anyway. And actually the light horse did win the combat, but they did so little damage they were forced to break off. So to create a cohesion point loss with light horse is very difficult, but you can do it if the medium infantry is damaged in some way, or if it's poor quality, like it's rabble for instance, or it has no heavy anti-cavalry weapons, such in this case heavy weapons. So charging a fresh unit in a flank like we did in this case is not much use. However, have another instance where a light horse bow unit charged the flank of a medium infantry peltast unit that was disrupted in combat, had no anti-cavalry weapon, and had lost 325 out of 460 men, or 30% of its men. So the hints sheet said it's not very good. There's only 53% chance of a win, but the medium infantry did suffer a cohesion point drop and soon routed. So you've got to pick your time for this sort of thing. And this time it was only light horse archers. The last instance it was actually Javelin light infantry. So you've got it. If you want your light horse to do something really nasty to medium infantry, you've got to be in that situation where the infantry is already severely degraded. But nevertheless, it is possible for it to happen that a flank charge by light horse will cause a cohesion point loss. Okay, let's move on to another point. So this is a typical situation you'll see at the start of a game, where, for instance, you have light horse and so does your enemy. In this case, the two sides were Gallic Thracians and Roman Thracians. On our side, we had the Gallic Thracians. And I picked out one here that was a bow-armed light horse, and opposing it on the other side was a javelin-armed light horse. And worked it out that if I moved 5 squares, I would not be in range of the enemy light horse. So how did I work that out? Well, press G, which is for grid. That'll show you all the squares on the board, and you can then count the squares between your unit and the enemy unit. So if we moved 5 units forwards, or in fact if we move even more than 2 squares forwards, the enemy unit will be able to reach me on its turn and shoot at me. Whereas I still wouldn't be able to shoot at it on this first turn. Let's see what we can do. So what we did instead is work out the distances. So we've got a 5 square move plus a 2 square range, which goes to 7 squares. but if we move up the 5 squares, as I said, we won't be within range, and they can move up and immediately be within range and shoot at us first. And what we want is to be able to shoot first and disrupt the enemy. So what we do is we work out that if we move only 2 squares, our opponent, when he moves 5 squares, because he's javelin armed, will not be able to be in range of my unit. But if he does move the full 5 squares, then I will be in range of him because I've got bows. So patience is required with light horse. Don't rush in. Work out just how far you can move and then move that distance. So, and that's what actually happened. The AI moved 5 full squares with all of its light cavalry in that square. I moved mine only 2 squares. The AI was unable to shoot at me, but my cavalry was then in a perfect shooting position. So I then had enough shooters to concentrate the fire on 2 enemy units and disrupt them. So you need usually a minimum of 3 units to shoot at full power on an enemy unit to cause it to disrupt. And so I used 3 light cavalry units on 1 enemy light cavalry unit and 2 2 light cavalry units and 1 bow unit, 1 infantry bow unit to shoot at the other one. And that's what the right hand panel shows here. Shows you how I've got the 2 light horse disrupted. I've also, because he's moved right up to me, I am able to move one of mine right behind his, giving me a lot more options. So in this case, we are well on our way to freeing Thrace from the Roman yoke. Okay, let's have a look at another chart, another instance. So this is a basic principle that applies to all Field of Glory units, not just light cavalry. And that basically is, if you've got the opportunity to charge this turn or charge into the flank the following turn, wait and charge into the flank. So here we've got a light horse unit that can't shoot because the enemy is in combat. I could charge into that enemy unit with it, but it would only be a front-on confrontation, and I would have bows against javelins for the first round, which would put me at a disadvantage, and it would not be very likely to succeed, and the combat could go forever, even with 2 against 1. With light cavalry, sometimes there are a lot of staying power. So here we moved the light cavalry up instead of charging. We have moved it into a flanking position. We can't shoot or charge this turn. But we were able to do it the following turn. A flank charge will cause an immediate cohesion drop in this case because it's lights versus lights, and after that it will also mean that the enemy unit is fighting at a two units against 1. So this meant that the subsequent combat was very short. And the message of this is always wait and charge in the flank if possible. So some basic principles of cavalry tactics are that your greatest weapons are movement and maneuver. Try not to frontally charge using cavalry unless the enemy has been weakened in some way. It doesn't really matter what your cavalry is armed with. They should be trying to move around the enemy, or get in his rear, get his flank, or just even threaten the enemy. That's what cavalry is supposed to do, not bash up the enemy necessarily. Especially with ancient cavalry anyway. So the simplest way to do that usually is to shoot up the enemy first. So a cavalry charge should only go in after the enemy has been shot up first. Any shooting damage will help. And an alternative to that is to fix the enemy from the front with infantry and attack the flanks and rear with cavalry, and then pursue with light horse. That should be your basic sequence. It's not that it's that easy to achieve, of course. And I mentioned in the previous video that you can convert fragmented troops to routers, or disrupted to fragmented with light horse, if you keep them in the enemy rear. I was very successful against a Roman army once, just doing that. Every time something became fragmented, send in a light horse into its rear and it routed. Okay, so let's have to look at some other light cavalry tactics. So here we got Light Spear Cavalry. Oh, sorry, this is not light horse, this is cavalry. Cavalry armed with light spear, but it could be, in this case, it could also be lance armed cavalry, it wouldn't matter. So in this sequence, we've got an armoured cavalry unit, which is number 1, ready to charge the imitation legionaries who are over to its right and front. But the imitation legionaries have a general attached, and they are heavy infantry, so the factors are quite bad and we're not likely to do much. So what do we do? Well, we've got a bow armed cavalry unit there, so first thing we're going to shoot with that. And we've got another armoured cavalry unit behind us, which we are moving around, so that in a subsequent turn we will be able to hit the flank of the imitation legionaries with it. So what we did that, we had a general attached though to the cavalry, so we thought it was worth a try, so we charged in and we were lucky, it stuck. So the shooting caused a loss of the numerical advantage that the infantry has. So even if you don't cause a cohesion loss, it can help. So now we've got the infantry fixed, and the flanking cavalry is in place, ready to charge, and it has a 97% chance of success and a 100% chance of causing a cohesion drop from that position, even though it's taken us an extra turn to get us to that position. We charge them in, and the successful charge means that the infantry is now finding 2 combatants, which made it possible for the original front-on charges to stick around. The legionaries, having a general with them, actually rallied back to normal status, and had to be charged in the rear again by another cavalry unit before they finally routed. And it has to be noted that this sort of thing is only possible if you first establish cavalry superiority on that flank. And in this case, I cleared away all those light horse, as I showed you earlier, and that enabled me to do this. So it's actually quite common for cavalry to bounce off if they charge heavy infantry, especially if they are armed with light spears, and it can be very hard to make them stick. So that's why you need to do something special, like shoot at them, put a general with them, shoot, charge downhill, do whatever you can to increase your odds of success, because otherwise they'll just charge in and bounce off. And if your cavalry can shoot, like in that previous example, I had some cavalry that could have charged actually, but they had bows and no spears or anything like that, so their charge would not have been strong at all, but they had a good shooting ability. So if your cavalry can shoot in preference to charging. It can cause a lot more damage, and especially with light cavalry, you just don't know what's going to happen when you charge your cavalry into the enemy cavalry, and the charges are likely to fail. Whereas if you can get 3 shooting units at full strength, you'll probably cause a cohesion loss on an average quality unit, and if they're superior, it takes longer. And also, as shown in the previous example, if you've got no cavalry on one flank, it causes a problem for you, but you may have to do something like that, because creating a cavalry superiority on one flank can be very important. And so if you only have a few on your own army, put them all on one flank, so you can try and at least not be overwhelmed by the enemy cavalry on that flank. The other flank you can do something like put terrain there, or put a lot of spearmen or something, and some bowmen or something like that. Okay, so now let's have a look at some lancer tactics. And in this example, we had a Hellenistic Thracian army fighting a Gallic army. So we had Xistopheroi facing Warband. And in this case, the Warband was about to charge some light horse if we just left it alone, and the light horse would be caught in the flank, possibly because it was fighting the rear of the light chariot, and that certainly would have been bad for the light horse. So we resolved to charge the Xistopheroi into the warband, even though we knew this would probably not do much good. But there were some redeeming features of this, though, because we had 2 light horse bow units available. So we could do some charge preparation. So the first thing you do when you're going to charge your lancers in is look for something that can shoot. And I've got 2 units here, so they shot. They did not cause a cohesion loss, but the warband had taken some losses. And I don't know if it actually helped, probably not, but the lancers also didn't charge straight ahead. They charged slightly into the flank of the warband. And what happened was that they actually did cause a cohesion loss. So once again, it's important to stress, before you charge, do your charge preparation, which in this case was do some shooting. And now that we had a disrupted warband unit, it was more or less safe to have a go with the light horse. The light horse shouldn't shoot anymore, but it could charge in. So, and one of them was, even though they were only bowmen, one of them would be charging the flank, and the other one had swords, so on the melee it would be doing better. And as it turned out, we then ended up with 3-1 fighting the warband, and I think that's actually one of the charges caused the warband to become fragmented. And the following turn they routed, and we had one of those wonderful moments when the warband routed, and then the light chariot behind it was hit by the same Xistophroi unit, which then pursued the light chariot into a cavalry unit, which also routed, and this basically cleared up the whole of that flank, which had been very troublesome for me, and after that basically the game was over. It was just a matter of mopping up. So Thrace was saved from the Gauls, at least this time. Okay, some other things you can do. At the end of your turn, make sure you check every unit to see if you can make a turn. It's often possible to do so after shooting or movement with cavalry or light horse, because they've got all those action points, and they are allowed to turn. Light horse, for instance, can turn twice in a turn, and that sets them up for the next turn. When you're using cavalry or light horse, don't be afraid of difficult terrain, particularly during deployment. And if you hide your troops in there, that can produce some very good results. As well, your opponent probably won't be expecting you to move through difficult terrain, and it isn't actually all that much slower, really. Of course, if you get caught in there, then it's not going to be good for you. But don't be afraid to move through it. And also, another thing to remember is that if you can't charge a infantry unit with cavalry, it is helpful even just to point the cavalry at that unit within charge distance, because that will cause that infantry unit to have a -1 on cohesion tests. I mentioned earlier how cavalry can follow up and then follow up again. If they bash into one thing, they then bash into the rear of another. And cataphracts tend to do the same thing because they are so powerful. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. In this case, it was a bad thing for the cataphracts because he ended up facing an elephant and surrounded by enemy cavalry. Just be aware of that sort of thing may happen. Okay, so another thing you can do with your light horse is they're very cheap troops, only 24 points, and so they're good troops to put on the flank where you don't want to fight the enemy, where you want the enemy to take as much time as possible to come to grips with you. So it's quite common to have a flank that you're confident of, and where you can mass all your troops, and a flank where you really have very few troops at all. So in this case, again we've got the Hellenistic Thracians versus the Gauls, and the Gauls have got all their super troops, their superior warband with a general, which basically can walk over anything, but here I've got it facing just the one unit, a light horse unit. The light horse unit can charge or shoot at the enemy, but it won't do any serious damage to do that. What we can do is make these super units on the enemy side, for which I don't really have anything to match. I can make them react to this light horse unit. So I move the light horse right up to it and start shooting, and this caused it was the AI playing in this case, caused it to turn to face me and charge me, and it completely mucked up that part of its line, which then, being warband, of course, it takes a while for it to turn around and get back into position again. So this one unit has managed to do a significant amount of damage to the enemy's movement, and that's really what you want to do. You really want to have just a few units on one flank that are causing the maximum amount of delay to the enemy, while on the other flank you have the mass of your army using their numbers to overwhelm him. Because you only need to get 40% to win. You don't need to get the whole army. And it has to be pointed out that the previous situation was only possible because the Gauls had put no cavalry on their flank, where I had that one light horse unit. So of course you won't always be able to do that, but you can do a variation of it. And that the answer to skirmishes is not rules protecting the heavy infantry, but to use your own skirmishes. So it's usually a good idea, if you've got enough cavalry, to put most of it on one flank, but always leave a few on the other flank. For this type of thing, light horse javelin are terrific. So that's just some cavalry tactics. Now let's have a look at some anti-cavalry tactics. And the basic 5 anti-cavalry tactics may be called firepower, spears, terrain, other cavalry, and elephants. So firepower. So generally, mounted troops are vulnerable to being shot up. Even fully armoured cataphracts can be shot up if 3 units shoot at them at close range for 2 turns. By the way, most units can be shot up and routed in 3 turns of shooting, if they are average in quality. 3 turns by 3 units shooting at full effect will quite possibly rout a unit. For other units, 3 units shooting at short range should be sufficient to shoot at a mounted unit with average morale. In this case, shooting up meaning making them lose a cohesion drop. So the first turn you make them disrupted, second turn they're fragmented, third turn routed. Elephants, however, are different. They sometimes seem to be invulnerable to shooting, while other times, you shoot them a few times and you are able to make them lose a cohesion point. And that's what's supposed to be happening historically, that elephants are vulnerable to being shot up. But people do things like put a general on top of the elephant. Makes it very hard to shoot them up. And sometimes you just can't tell why it is, but you shoot at the element over and over and over again and nothing happens. And the next thing is spears. So you've got to be careful with this. As I asked Richard Bodley Scott, he said that it's inadvisable for spearmen and pikes to charge lancers. It might occasionally be justifiable if cavalry break off is blocked. In other words, the cavalry can't get away, but the impact phase will be risky, and that is true. That is especially true for pikes, but not so much for spearmen. So check your factors before you do this. But I generally find with my Thracian spears that I've had a lot of success charging cavalry with them. What you're supposed to do, of course, is stand to receive. And of course you're better off with heavy infantry doing this than medium infantry. And it's also because the cavalry can just stand off and do nothing, it's best to have some shooting support as well. Otherwise they can just keep moving around you and with impunity. But spears are an effective counter to cavalry. Terrain. So cavalry don't like terrain. It restricts their movement and causes them to become disordered. And also you can get advantages from standing on a hill, which will help you resist a cavalry charge. Of course, the ideal situation is to have medium infantry on rough ground on top of a hill, or difficult terrain with light infantry in it. That's the ideal situation in which to be facing a cavalry charge. Even better, if it was on a hill, would be to have troops on different levels shooting. So maybe you might even have spearmen at the front, and then the next level up the hill have some archers shooting at the cavalry. Cavalry can effectively be attacked by infantry if they're in a confined area. So by putting your troops in that area that has a lot of terrain, you can give your infantry a much better chance when facing cavalry, because you're restricting their ability to break off or to get around your flank, and cavalry need to get around your flank. So you can put terrain on your flank, and that will stop them from doing that, mostly. And of course, another way to deal with cavalry is just to get your own light horse, cavalry, whatever. So the cavalry category defeats light horse, and cataphracts and lancers defeat other types of cavalry. Horse archers can defeat any type of horseman if they don't get caught. And Javelin, light horse are good for charging cavalry in the rear while they're engaged from the front by your own cavalry. So yeah, even though they are light horse, because they attack in the rear, quite often they can stick, and then you've got the 2-to-1 effect. That's a good use for Javelin light horse. And as I showed earlier on, if you've got skirmishes facing skirmishes, try to move so you either got the first shots along the line or the first standing still shot, and try to avoid receiving fire from shooters standing still. That's very important. If the enemy gets to shoot at you while he is standing still, he gets to fire at full effect, and you're going to be in trouble. And again, to do that, you do it by pressing G, counting the squares to make sure that he cannot move to be in a position such that he'll be standing still and shooting at you on his turn. Elephants. I mentioned in the other part of this video that elephants are a terrific anti-cavalry weapon, because they disorder cavalry. They don't drop a cohesion level if charged by the cavalry in the flank, and they move 3 squares reasonably fast, only slightly slower than normal cavalry. They have a high POA. So basically, keep your cavalry away from elephants unless they're horse archers. Is the story there? There's really nothing you can do with cavalry against elephants except shoot at them. So, in summary, light horse is best for defeating other light horse or causing fragmented troops to rout, or for shooting up other troops. Cavalry don't have much staying power, but are good all-round troops. Try not to charge heavy infantry frontally though. Other mounted troops and elephants may be difficult to integrate in your army. For instance, if you've got to try and keep your elephants away from your cavalry, but form a very useful addition if available. So thanks for watching, and if you'd like to learn more about light cavalry and cavalry tactics, you may like to read my book, The Gods of Battle, which is about Thracian warfare, but actually contains a lot of other general information about ancient light troops. It also contains a lot of terrific stuff that you won't find anywhere else about the Thracians.